All right, so today I want to talk about the group that I developed that I call Tuned In Parenting. And what it is really talking about is a parenting kind of way of being with your children that's focused on emotional attunement and relational connection. So a lot of it borrows from attachment theory, but whereas attachment theory kind of focuses on the first year or so of a child's life, we kind of want to take those principles and apply them across childhood, adolescence, even into adulthood. And that's because a lot of what we're basing this on is that the way that we develop relationships as children affects the way that we relate to people throughout our lives, and of course the way that we parent our own children. A lot of what we're going to talk about is from this book by Daniel Siegel called Parenting from the Inside Out, that kind of gets a lot of these ideas. So that's where I pulled a lot of the kind of ideas from, and I definitely recommend this book strongly. So let me kind of give you an idea of what the group will be like to kind of give you a better sense of the content. It will be 8 sessions with 7 different topics that we would cover. The first half hour of each session would be psychoeducation, and then we'd have an hour of process time. So the first lesson would be on developmental stages, and this is just to give parents an idea of kind of what their children are going through, to kind of show them that, your 2-year-old didn't take all your shoes out of the closet because they're mad at you, but because they're trying to explore their environment. Getting parents to understand that sort of thing. After that, the second lesson would be on relationship models, which is where we would teach attachment theory, teach the different kinds of attachment, really with a focus on attachment as a spectrum. So you're not necessarily always concretely going to have one attachment style, but you might lean toward one or the other. And then with that, really promoting that idea that the way that you learn to relate, the relationship models you learned as a child, you've carried throughout your lifetime. And so how do you want to change that if you do? So there'd be a lot of reflection on the client's personal development in that section. The third topic would be self-soothing, and that's because parenting is stressful, and a lot of parents don't really have basic coping skills. And so we would probably use a lot of ACT and mindfulness methods, teaching some parents some way to self-soothe. And that's because a big piece of kind of what we're trying to get parents to do is to be aware of their own emotions, deal with their own emotions so they can parent kind of out of a clear head and be able to focus on their children. After that, we would talk about attunement, which is basically just tuning into your child's internal experience. So kind of, basic empathy with children is kind of the way to think about that. And that's kind of one of the major themes of the group. Next, we would talk about communication. And in Siegel's book, he talks about something called contingent communication, is what he calls it, which is really taking the kind of factual information of what's happened and the emotional information and kind of integrating those two things. So if you think about the cortex and the limbic system, that's kind of what you're getting at, trying to integrate the emotion and the facts. So, your kid, he slips and falls off the slide, so kind of helping the kid retell and make sense of that story. So talking about what happened, the events that happened, but then what was the child's internal experience of those events to kind of help the child learn to integrate the facts and the emotions of what's going on. We would talk about boundaries in the 6th session. A lot of parents aren't able to set clear boundaries because they're not able to tolerate their own emotions. So I can't make my kid do this thing that he needs to do because I can't stand my child looking unhappy, or I have this thought that my child hates me and that they're always going to hate me. So because a parent can't tolerate that, they're not able to set clear boundaries, which turns out to not be in the best interest of the child. So that's something that we would talk about as well. We would talk in the 7th session about rupture and repair, which is basically what to do when that relational connection with the child has been broken. So you've gotten angry with the child, you've gotten upset. How do you repair that relationship and kind of talk about those cycles of rupture and repair that relationships go through. The last session would just be kind of a putting it all together, kind of seeing what clients had gotten out of the experience, kind of helping them consolidate it and have some takeaways as they left the group. The theoretical basis for using attachment theory is a few different things that research has shown. One, that people with secure attachments have better socialization, coping skills, and upward mobility. So even children born into really adverse environments like poverty, if they have a secure attachment with someone, they tend to be more resilient. So that's a big part of why attachment theory is a basis for this. Another thing is that children whose parents communicate about emotions tend to understand emotions better. So there was one article that I read that was talking about parents who were not afraid of their kids' emotions and didn't consider emotions to be dangerous would help their children process the emotions, and those children had a better understanding of emotional states. So that really backs up the ideas that we're looking at here. Lastly, people often carry their attachment models into adult relationships. So those relationship models you learn as a child, unless you intentionally do some things to change that, and there is something called earned secure attachment, I believe, that we would also talk about in the group. But unless you do something to change that, you're going to start to repeat those patterns. That's something that research has actually shown. A few other relevant theories that we would kind of tag on with attachment theory, psychodynamic theories, specifically object relations and relational psychoanalysis. Along with that, a lot of narrative therapy, just because a lot of what we would be doing is helping parents make sense of their own stories and their own experiences. And then lastly, ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, for the kind of developing coping skills, emotional awareness, and regulation. The theoretical basis for using group therapy is that parenting groups have been shown to improve parents' confidence, or otherwise their own perception of their self-efficacy as parents has been shown to improve through parenting groups, as well as their coping skills. So parenting groups have been shown to help parents develop better coping skills. Along with that, parents who have participated in parenting groups tend to cite the social support as one of the most beneficial things for them. And one opinion that I have is that we right now live in a parenting culture that is very isolated and very judgmental. And so there's a lot of parents out there who are struggling, who don't really have anyone they can process that with, or don't really have a support system to help them through that. So that's really one thing that we would really want to create with this group, and one of the most important aspects of being a new parent, in my opinion. So a few different contexts that would be appropriate for this group. Social service programs such as community mental health treatment programs, transitional living programs. In my current internship at a homeless / transitional living shelter, I work with a lot of parents doing individual therapy, and a lot of them are coming out of addiction. A lot of them have their own attachment injuries as children. A lot of them have gone through poverty, trauma, a lot of these things, and they are drowning as parents, and they lack coping skills, and they lack a clear philosophy for how to relate to their children. And they're doing the best that they can, but we spend so much time working on them in individual therapy, we don't really get to talk about how they can be parenting better. And so that was kind of where the idea for a group like this came to me. And then also I think private practice would be a good context for a group like this. Oftentimes in private practice you see a lot of depression and anxiety, along with other mental health issues, but those are two specific things that can be exacerbated by being a parent, but they can also lead to insecure attachments with children. And so really using your client base of private practice clients, or networking with other counselors to bring in people who are experiencing those issues, and again be able to address how that's affecting their parenting, because it's difficult to get around to that sometimes in individual sessions. With the participants, we would try to do a 30-minute phone consult to kind of make sure they would be a good fit for the group. We might do a sit-down one-on-one session if we really weren't sure and need to assess some more things. But we would try and offer the group to men and women. I think a lot of times when we think of parenting, we just think of women, and we just kind of don't include men and realize that, in an intact family, they're half of the people attaching to their children, so they need to know this stuff as well. And then it would be really great to have couples in the group, if possible, and having both parents really learning this stuff so that they can really be unified in the way they parent. We would open the group up to couples or single parents who are pregnant to having children 5 years and younger. I feel like this stuff is really most relevant for parents of small children, but there would definitely be some wiggle room on that. If there were a lot of parents with older children, or if someone really had a significant need, there could that would not be a hard and fast kind of rule as far as excluding people from the group. We'd be looking for parents who are interested in a broad philosophy of parenting and not really looking for concrete skills. So if they're looking for how do I sleep train my infant and get my toddler to eat and get my 5-year-old to quit acting out, this isn't really the group for that. This stuff is definitely going to help you with that, but if you're just wanting some practical to-dos, you're really going to be frustrated in a group like this. So we kind of want to weed that sort of thing out, as well as parents who are experiencing really significant parenting difficulties, like if they have a child with a disability or a severe mental health diagnosis, or if they themselves have a severe mental health diagnosis. Individual therapy or maybe a specific support group for that specific issue might be a better place for them. So that's something we would also consider as we're looking at participants for the group. Lastly, challenges to this group. One of the big ones would be adapting the kind of abstract theories of attachment for parents, especially parents who are in some sort of social service program. So really, a key to that is paying attention to the language that the parents use. So in those first few sessions, seeing how they talk about parenting, how they talk about relationships, and really adapting their language rather than trying to get them to adopt the academic community's language. And along with that also would be making the class practical. One thing that the study showed is that parents found parenting groups helpful if it actually made them better parents. So we try and use really practical real-life examples as we process through the group. Another key to the group would be creating a safe environment to talk about the stress of parenting, as well as to talk about clients' personal issues from their past that are affecting their parenting now. As I mentioned, a parenting culture that is isolated and judgmental does not really promote that, and that would be really key to making this group successful. Another issue we would face probably is childcare availability issues. Parents of small children do not have a lot of free time, so we would try and have to have our groups in a time of the week that's going to be conducive to their schedules, and really be able to be flexible and figure out what works best for the clients. Promoting confidentiality is always going to be difficult in any group, especially a group like this where people are sharing really kind of tender issues as far as their own struggles as parents and their own past history as children. So really talking about the importance of confidentiality to the group and trying to create that safe environment would be very important. An ethical issue that might be faced in a group like this would be reporting of abuse. If a parent shares that they've been abusing their child or an instance of abuse, as a mandatory reporter, you've got to report that, but how do you do that kind of in that group context? How do you address the situation in the immediacy of the group, especially when all these other people now know about it? So that would definitely be an ethical issue that could be faced. Lastly, a difficulty would be not promoting your own opinions or values too much. And obviously, for me leading this group, I believe in these theories about parenting, so I'm starting out really promoting my own values. So I'd have to be very careful to not appear judgmental of ways parents do things that are different than me, but really keep it focused on how does that relate to what we're talking about here, and how does it relate to how that person wants to parent, not necessarily projecting how I would want them to parent. So that would be another really important thing to keep in mind if I were leading a group like this. So that's kind of a summary of this group. I would love any critical feedback that folks might have. This really took a lot of time for me to think through a lot of different elements, and I know that there's a lot of other parents and people who've been parents a lot longer than I have in our classes, so I would love any critical feedback and positive feedback that you might have. So thank you very much for listening.